Welcome again to another episode of our Better Together video blog. Today we're joined with Ron Nydam, and we're glad to have him along with us. Ron serves as one of our advisory council members, and we'll introduce him in just a moment. But before we get going, if you're unfamiliar with Better Together, we are a movement of members, leaders, pastors, churches, and across classes throughout the Christian Reformed Church, calling the denomination to a mission-focused, baptismally based identity that allows for disagreement on matters that do not determine our salvation, for the purpose of unity and for the purpose of mission together in the church. My name is Nate DeYoung McCarran, and I have the joy to serve as one of the steering team members for Better Together. I also serve as the lead pastor here at a local congregation in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Fuller Avenue Christian Reformed Church. And today we're going to be talking with Ron about how do we navigate some of these tensions that we've been diving into as part of the Better Together family. Ron comes to us as the professor of pastoral care emeritus from Calvin Theological Seminary, where he served and taught for 16 years. Ron is a lifelong member of the Christian Reformed Church. He has served as a pastor, as a counselor, as a professor. His passion is in pastoral counseling, which he continues to practice and engage. And he continues to serve as an elder in his local Christian Reformed congregation there in Denver, Colorado. Ron, it's great to have you with us. We're glad to be able to join together. I understand you're up in the mountains, and so you've got more beautiful vistas than I do of this parking lot, but we're glad to be together today. Any additional pieces that you want to say just by way of introduction to you and your history and your experience?
Well, maybe one little piece, Nate. I've had, for all these years, I've had a special interest in relinquishment and adoption. And taking that conversation here is to talk about the importance of attachment. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about deep attachment for really healthy, loving life. Mm-hmm. And when that attachment is compromised, all kinds of problems kick up. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of fits a little bit when we talk about attachment, including our relationship with God, because that's another very important connection here that people sometimes struggle with.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would add that piece only to say, let's talk about what happens at a deeper level in the lives of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's great, Ron. You know, one of the conversations, and I'm sure you engage this in your pastoral counseling, one of the critiques of the denomination as we've engaged in this conversation around sexuality has been how the denomination has engaged, or at times struggled to engage, the importance and role of stories. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of stories? You hear people's stories all the time. The importance of stories and how it is that we can listen with care to one another's stories.
Well, stories, are so important, first of all, to be told. Mm. People need to be able to tell their stories. There needs to be safe space for that. Mm-hmm. And the gay and lesbian folk in our denomination don't really experience very much safe space for that conversation. And so if they have same-sex longings, as we call them, it's pretty much a secret. Mm-hmm. And living with a secret is problematic all by itself. It takes a certain amount of energy away from everything else to live with a secret. I listen to stories all the time. And, the work of the Holy Spirit keeps coming up in my mind. Like, I think God's Spirit works in the context of people telling their stories. And I think the Holy Spirit brings change to us when we are in conversation. Mm-hmm. I think the Holy Spirit works through conversations. And if we're not having them, then there's something that we're not able to really access. I listen to stories all the time, and my bias is certainly on the left side of the story, because I know how much pain these people are living with and going through. And I grieve, I lament that we are part of the problem just as much as we're trying to be part of the solution. So stories matter, and I think that they give us a testimony that is moving And when it moves us, it changes us. And I think that's the work of God's Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, as we've navigated this with Better Together, one of the key goals is to create space for these kinds of conversations, to create this kind of space where even there might be faithful disagreement. And as we have this conversation today, I just want to begin also by noting that at Better Together, we understand that we represent a whole wide variety of views on this question of sexuality, that you are not going to hear a monolithic, simple, resounding line from us regarding this question around sexuality. We have individuals who are members of Better Together who are solidly conservative on this and view this in a very traditional way. And we have others who find themselves further affirming and find themselves there too. And so I just want to begin by recognizing that as we engage this conversation together today, that we do not represent all of Better Together one way or the other. And so we want to create space to hear these kinds of stories so that we can engage better as the church for the sake of mission. So I hope that's okay that I threw that in there, Ron.
I want you to. Okay,
just as we get going. One of the other dynamics in all of this is that much of this conversation around sexuality, really any kind of conversation around ethical conflict, is really a question about sin, right? And you've worked a lot in the classroom, in the local church, in your counseling, I'm sure, and let me put this a little tongue in cheek. Ron, I'm sure you're very familiar with sin, as I am. But how do you see this conversation or definition of what sin is influencing this whole debate in the Christian Reformed Church?
In the seminary, we call it harmatology, if you want the big $2 word for it. And from where I sit, and I name my biases because they sit next to gay and lesbian people who are hurting. But when I think about this, I find myself saying, let's take another look at the idea of sin and then see how that lines up with the dilemma that we're facing these days. I mean, sin separates us from God, and sin turns our hearts to stone. And this is kind of a wormwood and screw tape conversation where there is a way in which sin destroys relationships. Sin creates conflict and distance. I mean, sin does a lot of really troublesome things, and that's why our salvation is so very, very important. But when I think about the questions that we're addressing with same-sex marriage in the HSR, there are some things that just don't quite line up for me. Because there's not a lot of conversation going on, there's a lack of critical thinking about this. The opposite of belief is doubt. And we all know that we both believe and doubt. That's part of our experience. But when belief becomes so strong, then critical thinking kind of gets lost. That's my experience. I was walking across the parking lot in our church here in Denver, talking briefly with one of the members of our church, who basically said, Ron, it's in the Bible. That's it. Case closed. And this couple left our church on the HSR issue, and they'd been coming to our church like forever. So it was very painful for all of us. But when you say it's in the Bible, then the critical thinking stops. Something's in the Bible for sure. We talk about these passages often. But when we talk about these passages, we're trying to understand and interpret them correctly. And with regard to the gay and lesbian questions of Scripture, there are different perspectives and different interpretations of the very same verse. I mean, I reference Romans 1 a lot because I think that's the linchpin passage in Scripture that defines things for so many of us. But I think that sin does all those negative things, And then I try to line it up with the experience of two Christian people who love each other dearly, but are kind of pushed back away from us as a communion because of their relationship with each other. It's not just touching somebody, it's also having an intimate connection. And I go back to my attachment stuff. And I know how important attachment is, because attachment is like the foundation for relationship. Genesis 1:26-27, the image of God thing. And there is a way in which that attachment is disallowed, not allowed for a certain community of people. And so sin destroys relationships and pushes us away from God. But I'm listening to Christian people who love the Lord and who want to be in an intimate relationship. And that's where we, as a denomination, we're kind of split on the whole issue right there. But I think that that the question about what sin is and all of its negative possibilities and results, really, all those conversations about sin, they don't line up for me with two people who love each other and love the Lord. So there's a kind of a disconnect for me in terms of how come this doesn't line up better. Sin is so destructive, and these people are trying to creatively care for each other. So maybe I should stop there.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the realities, right, within the church is that we navigate this question of sin in a way as well, right? We react to it. And rightly so, right? We're called to live more and more like Jesus. We're called to be shaped in his image. We're called out of darkness and into light. But one of the questions, I guess, that some have asked is, how did we end up here? What led us to this place of such disagreement? We're close to Synod 2023, but if we back up a minute, and I'm wondering if you can help us better understand how you think we arrived where we're at now. What led us here? What drew that line for us?
I'm not sure how to answer your question, but I'll tell you what comes to mind. That's the nature of conversation, right? The entire Canadian country and the Supreme Court of Iowa both made the same decision on the basis of justice. So in those two locations, state of Iowa and all of Canada, same-sex marriage is accepted. All right. And so the advocacy for the gay and lesbian community has kind of come to the front burner more. And I think that part of what we're dealing with includes a reaction to those kinds of decisions, that we don't want to see the government telling us what we can and cannot do. And we don't want to see the government joining in with the advocacy of gay and lesbian people. And so that's one side of the pendulum. And we're probably swinging on the other side of that same pendulum, saying, no, that's not right. We don't want that to happen. I think it kind of brought it all to the front burner. I'll say this too. This, for pretty much all our lives, the gay question, so to speak, has been under wraps, and it hasn't been talked about a lot. And now it's a very public agenda. And we are, as a denomination, this is our struggle, but it's also the struggle of our society today, that we're taking this on in a very public way. And what I'm also concerned about is our gay and lesbian members and friends are watching us. And they're watching how we handle this question of their right to intimacy. And so I think that, how do we get here? By kind of listening to the culture and disagreeing with it. We are, I kind of see the CRC really way deep down as really working to be countercultural on purpose, so that we follow God's leading more than we follow the leading of a given government. And I think that now it's on the front burner. Now everybody's seen it. I mean, in a microcosm, in our own congregation, we've lived together for years and years and years, and we didn't talk about the issue much, but we certainly had a great deal of fellowship with each other, and we were enjoying each other. And now we have people leaving the church on both sides of the issue. Some because we're not strong enough with regard to support, and some who are really upset that we support it. So it came to the front burner sociologically, is kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what is motivating people this way? I mean, there's the sociological aspect for sure, but there's also this internally there are these driving forces that seem to be at play. Can you talk about those?
You and I've talked about this a little bit. Hold on just a minute.
Yep.
My throat gets dry when I'm talking. One of the kind of, what should I call it? One of the pieces of clinical work, of good counseling, is to always notice the deeper motivations. And that's, I think, where this whole conversation really needs to have some traction. Because the deepest motivations of behavior are usually seen in the results of that behavior. If you want to know what deepest motivations are, look at the results of behavior, and you'll start to see your answer. Now, let me use an example, because this is a theory. It's hard to buy. We've gone through a whole plague almost of teenage suicide in our country. And you know that, what used to happen 20 years ago, when it happened in Columbine here in Colorado, the whole world noticed it. And the culture now has absorbed it. We're still having teen suicides, but the culture has absorbed it and not talked about it much. It's done that with eating disorders, things like that. The culture absorbs it. And my fear about guns, by the way, is we're just going to absorb the fact that our kids have to grow up with so many bullets in the air. But back to motivation. I'm saying it again. The deepest motivation for behavior is usually seen in its result. When you go to a funeral of a young person who's taken his or her life, what do you see? I mean, it breaks my heart to think about it. You see 200 people who are weeping, if not on the outside, certainly on the inside. You're seeing 200 people who have been wounded, hurt deeply. And I'm saying, it's a theory, but I'm saying that the motivation for suicide, especially for young people, is the rage they feel, the anger they feel. And they've made 200 people feel some of the feelings that they have had. Now, suicide is turning rage against yourself. It's an act of violence. And what is the deepest motivation when I'm doing clinical work with people who tried to kill themselves? When the anger comes out, the person calms down. But when the anger is hidden, the person lives on an edge. And sometimes that edge is suicidal. And a lot of times with teenagers, we have attempts that don't succeed. And so we have these conversations with our young people saying, what's going on? And they realize how angry they were. So I'm saying, by way of analogy, let's take a look at what we got here. What's the deepest motivation for where we stand as a denomination and the direction that we anticipate we'll be going toward in terms of making sure what's the deepest motivation? Let's look at the results of the behavior. If it plays out that way, we have decided there's a whole group of people we can no longer associate with. By the way, we are teaching our entire next generation, but we're talking about a divorce here. Instead of a conversation and the therapy of conversation kind of thing, we're seeing people saying, I can't hold on to myself and be with you anymore. And so what we have in terms of our denominational challenge is to notice the deepest results of our behavior. If it if it does reinforce the idea of confessional status and not remove it, the deepest motivation there is to push people away. Because that's what will happen.
Yeah.
And it's what I find so bothersome. I'm sitting next to people in church for 20 years, and we had a great conversation and a great relationship and a great life together, and now they're gone.
Yeah.
So what's the deepest motivation of the full court press that we are experiencing, and that dynamic will certainly be at Synod next week. But I mean, let's just look at it again with a different set of eyes and notice that what are we really doing? We're taking the whole gay and lesbian community and we're pushing them out the back door, and we're saying we can't associate with you if you behave in this fashion. And I mean, I think the right response is both anger and lament about that. But I want to say, to go back to the third way platform here, it's not that I'm right. It's not that I'm right, but that I'm in conversation with people about it. And it is not me being right or our denomination being right that's going to change much. What's going to change, if anything changes, is the context of the relationship itself. And that's why I am so much with third way. We need to keep talking to each other. A lot of marital therapy is just learning to talk to each other once again and get the conversation going that got stuck. And so, yeah, I'm always noticing behavior, and I'm always wondering about its results. And that's guided my pastoral counseling all these years. You know, I mean, I love being involved with people this way, because at a very substantial level, they're in a lot of pain. And when we can lift that pain and turn it into something much better, that's so gratifying. That's what I'd like for our denomination, that we keep talking to each other. We go with third way style of relating to each other, and we stay in conversation. The Holy Spirit works in conversations, and we need to have them. And that's what I'm hoping we can, push for. So much for motivation. What's your next question?
Yeah. Well, if I can tug on a string there that you were talking about, right? This, one of the I think the rub points or the sticky points here for a lot of us in the CRC is this navigation around confessionality and rightness, right? And you just alluded to that kind of drive within the CRC system to be right, at the expense of the contextual relationship.
Right.
What's motivating that? What's motivating that drive for rightness? Is it? I think some on the conservative end would say that it's fear of the Lord, or it's a commitment to pursuing righteousness.
The drive to be right that you're talking about really needs to be thought through carefully. I think some of it has to do with the fear of being wrong. That would make me really want to be right if I was really afraid of being wrong. And we just need to take a look at this a minute. The fear of being wrong is kind of we're held hostage by something. And we're not able to consider other interpretations. I mean, the confessional thing feels to me like an overreach, an overstep. And in part, I think the reason that I say that is that it kind of slam dunks the ball and says the decision's been made. We don't have to think about this anymore. Gay people are pretty much not in our church. They've kind of gone other places, and we don't need to think about it anymore. And why would somebody say, I don't want to think about it anymore? There must be something rather, frightening of some sort? I think that even if it's not conscious, okay, the strength of this confessional status decision has to do so much with the fear of being wrong. And I think the way in which I want to think about this is to remember what Jesus said to us about loving our enemies.
Mm.
You know, we have to love our enemies, even if it's our husband or our wife. We have to love our enemies because that's what Jesus calls us to do.
Mhm.
And for those of us like me who are on pretty much the liberal side of the story, it's really important that our judgment subsides and our invitation to care moves forward.
Mhm.
It's very important that we see that we got to love our enemies, even if they're on the other side of this issue.
Mhm.
I mean, nobody really changes his or her mind because of an argument.
Mhm.
And you see, the thing about that is when you're defending, when you're defensive, you can't learn at the same time. You can only learn in safe space. Think about how kids are growing up.
Yeah.
If they're anxious, they can't learn.
Yeah.
They need a safe space to learn. And my concern, of course, is that we're not providing much safe space for conversation. We have one interpretation of Romans 1 that we're standing by as a denomination. But I want to ask the question, how many people know who Caligula was? How many Christian Reformed parishioners know Caligula and his story? Last week, Keith Manis wrote a really good piece in the Reformed Journal blog that comes out every day. And he really explained how Caligula took care of his horse. I mean, it's just crazy what he did. He built a barn for the horse and he fed the horse gold every now and then. But he was profoundly perverted. It was a sick, harsh, demonic way of being. And he was getting away with it until Cassius took a sword and slammed it into his genitals and said, that's the end of this man. And then we have this little verse in Romans 1 about getting the just reward for their behavior.
Mhm.
Most likely, this is a conversation, and the backdrop is Paul realizing that Caligula, who had just literally finished, okay, was the emperor, and the whole Roman Empire knew about him. And so Paul lifts up this example, and he's talking about Caligula, and that makes sense to me. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Well, the only point I would make here is there are differences of interpretation, and those differences need to be respected and understood, rather than standing on one lily pad and refusing to go any other place. And so my concern, again, is that we need to be people who can say there are different interpretations of this passage. Then let me add another piece. I don't know where it fits in our outline for the day. I know I really want to talk about it. And that is that all the passages that are in Scripture which speak against homosexual behavior, all of them are ways in which the abuse of sexuality is present. The passages in the Old Testament are from the purity code. We all know that. And these are the ways in which God distinguished the people of Israel from the heathen neighbors, whoever they might be. And all the passages in the New Testament are talking about abusive sexuality, but in all 7 of these passages, no one is talking about love. Now, one of the real principles that we've guided ourselves by all along is that love and commitment have to go together. And if there's sexual behavior without love, it is wrong. And sexual behavior which is complete needs to have a complete covenant. That's what we've always said. That's what we've taught ourselves and our children. And I think it's so important to just notice that the whole question of interpreting these passages, there are a variety of interpretations. And we need to respect people that we disagree with. And I want to say this clearly, too. I say, love your neighbor, right? Well, how do you love your neighbor when your neighbor thinks so differently from you? I think you respect the person and you try to understand where the person's coming from. And I don't know how this is going to sail, but what I see is that our Christian Reformed denomination is frightened. And I think fear is guiding these decisions. And, you know, it's just not the best of who we are. There are so many really sharp, thoughtful people in the Christian Reformed Church, but their voices are pretty much drowned out by the fear of being wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying maybe we won't know until we sit down with St. Paul in glory and say, can you explain what you meant here?
Yeah.
Because we're not sure we got it right at all.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have to live with differences of opinion, but in a good marriage, you live with differences of opinion and you respect each other. And our job on at third way kind of job is to make sure that everybody in the story feels cared for.
Mm-hmm.
Now here I go back to pastoral counseling. I know that's my method, right?
Yep.
But if everybody felt cared for and everybody felt understood,
Mm-hmm.
then we would be grown up enough to live with difference. You see the regressive quality to all of this?
Mm-hmm.
And we're becoming combative about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is my greatest lament, that the conversations are gone and we're becoming combative with each other. It's a marriage that's failing.
Mm-hmm.
And I catch it in my throat. Why are we teaching our kids how to get a divorce?
Mm-hmm.
Divorce is painful. It
Mm-hmm.
hurts everybody. And that's exactly what we're heading toward. And so, love your neighbor means love everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think we all wonder what Jesus might say, but we certainly know how Jesus would act. He would care about every voice that he can hear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my comment about love
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is. And then I want to make another comment. You got to stop me one of these days,
You're good.
Nate.
You're good.
All right.
I do have a follow-up. Can I interject just a
Yeah,
follow-up here,
please.
Ron?
I wish you would a little more, actually.
Okay. So I had the opportunity to have one of these conversations with Michael Golker from the Colossian Forum. One of the things that Michael said, it was a line that has stuck with me now, is that when we enter into these kinds of conversations and listen to these voices, oftentimes we want to self-define when we have listened and when we have failed to listen, right? Well, of course I listened to so-and-so. And he made the point, and it was just a simple line as he was talking, but that in order for us to really know whether we've listened or not, we have to listen. We have to give up the right of defining whether we've done that. We have to give that right up to those who are most disenfranchised or those who are on the edge, or because only when they turn around and say, you've listened to us, have we really listened? And I would imagine you see that in your pastoral counseling, whether it be with a couple, right? He never listens to me. She never listens to me. Right. And it's only when the person on the edge turns around and says, oh, you did listen. Thank you.
Let me piggyback on it right away. I have a little quote, okay? Comes from a professor in Boston who's a friend of mine. Love is not love until it's experienced. I'll say it again. Love is not love until it's experienced. Now, for us as a denomination, we can say we still want to love these people, the way we want to say it. But love is not love until it's experienced. And that kind of fits with what you're saying here. Love is experienced when I know that you have listened to me and heard me. I'm just repeating what you just identified. Love is not love until it's experienced. And we can certainly profess that we love these people, but that doesn't mean that our love gets over there and it is experienced. And if it isn't experienced, the love doesn't have traction that someone might want to offer. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I'm kind of saying, without the conversation, not much is going to change. Mm-hmm. Let me make a comment about change off to the side for a moment. Mm-hmm. David Gushee wrote a book called Changing Our Mind. Mm-hmm. And it is the most readable conversation with the reader about what happened to him. And he's a Reformed Baptist theologian, church leader. And he says that in order for people to really change their minds, There needs to be a transformative experience. A transformative, I'll give you some examples. Well, he starts by talking about Paul on the road to Damascus and seeing Jesus. I mean, what a profound, powerful, transformative experience he had. You know, I'd like one of those one of these days myself, you know. But Gucci says without that, nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
Now, I have a memory that I'd like to just quickly share.
Yeah.
There's an older man in our congregation who was very much against women in office. And he had there's some parallels here. He had a real biblical argument that made a lot of sense. And that argument is still there. It's still out there. And some people really live by it. But when his daughter, who went through Calvin Seminary, went back to Denver and preached her first sermon, this older man had tears in his eyes. Mm-hmm. And he changed his mind about women preaching, women in office. Mm-hmm. When you have a son or a daughter who's gay or lesbian, that's a transformative experience. Mm-hmm. When you love someone that's suffering so much that he or she wants to take his or her own life, I mean, you know the statistics on gay teenagers and that their rate of suicide is so much higher than everybody else. And so I'm saying, let's take another look at what's really going on here and just kind of notice the ways in which if we can't really hear somebody, love is not experienced. Mm-hmm. And can we hear the person say to us, I love being Christian Reformed. I mean, for me and you, we've given our lives to this denomination, and I'll always love it. Mm-hmm. Can we make some space for the conversations to get going again? Mm-hmm. And that's the impulse of Third Way. Without that safe space to have conversation, not much is going to change. Mm-hmm. And according to Gucci, unless you have a transformative experience, nothing's going to change your mind either. Mm-hmm. The title of the book is Changing Our Mind, and we all know how hard that is. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, ask me a question. I'm kind of rolling.
You're good. You're good. You still got that professor in you. I think that a lot of this is helpful for us as we try and navigate this, and as we create the space to have these conversations, even across things you and I might disagree in, or you and I and the listener might disagree in. But the reality is that we are on the cusp. We're recording this on Wednesday. Synod delegates gather on Thursday. Synod kicks off on Friday. We are on the eve. Maybe lastly, we're running up on 40 minutes or so together. But if you could talk a little bit about what you hope to see out of this next week.
I know what I hope for. I can answer it right away.
Yeah.
That all of our strident voices on both sides of this issue, that those voices calm down. Mm. That we lower the temperature. I hope that Synod is able to lower the temperature, not raise it. Yeah. And I hope that Synod has the wisdom to see how important it is to lower that temperature so that we can have conversation with each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, what happens when somebody says, well, I disagree with you, so I have to leave my church? Mm-hmm. I mean, the fragmenting and the suffering that's in front of us is going to be so painful for so many people. Churches will leave, but churches will also die. Mm-hmm. I mean, Wormwood and Screwtape are having a good time with all this, because their impulse to be destructive is being seen by what we're deciding. So what do I hope for? I hope for calmer water, and I hope for people to be able in some way to start wondering about their own perspective, including me. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I need to say that so that I remember it. I'm hoping that the temperature will lower, that the confessional status thing will be put on the back burner, and that we keep the conversation going, simply put.
Yeah. Maybe in that same vein, that's the hope for Synod. do you have any word for the local congregational member, the local pastor who might not be showing up in Grand Rapids in the next couple of days, but might be watching this from a distance? Any word for them?
Well, sometimes I see people say, well, it's in God's hands. God is in control, and they make a comment about God's sovereignty. I think that's really dangerous. I think it's really presuming upon God in a way that I just think is really troublesome. I think the way in which we're going to benefit the most as parishioners is with patience and care.
Yeah.
I mean, back to that teenager again. If you're just angry with your children, you're not going to help them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you kids are angry because they need to be. There's reasons for irritation and anger.
Mm-hmm.
And when we hear them, everything starts to change.
Yeah.
And my way of thinking, the anecdote for me is that we're talking about a marriage that's failing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I know in a marriage that's failing, it's important that there's some safe space for each group to talk things over more and do that before they get together. Well, that process isn't really happening very much.
Yeah.
But that's what I would hope for.
Okay. Yeah.
And I should also say, if they're really upset, they should just call you.
Thanks,
Not
Sean.
me, you.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah. Glad you're not holding up my cell number.
All right. Yeah, right.
No, but I really appreciate you being with us today and your time here and your heart for the church and your heart for continued conversation. Regardless of where we find ourselves as part of the Better Together family, we're making this commitment to create space for conversation, to engage across difference, not because we just think we want to sit around and kind of mope in a mushy middle, but because we think that there's actual benefit to engaging, and that it's through more engagement, not less, that we can partner in mission. And so, Ron, I appreciate your time today, and appreciate your care for the church, both across the CRC, here in Grand Rapids, as you served at Calvin Seminary, and in your local context too. So thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, friends, if you've been with us through this time, we appreciate you watching and engaging. We invite you to engage with more of the materials that we put out, whether that's through our YouTube channel or whether it's on Facebook or whether it's on our website at thirdway.church. And we do invite you to continue the conversation, to keep it going, whether that's on the local level with patience and care for one another, or whether that's denominationally too. We'll be in prayer as Synod makes its way through over the next week or so, and we ask for your prayers in that as well. So, Lord bless you, Lord keep you. Thanks for being with us.